The bustling galactic hub of Zalara was always a spectacle of diversity, with species from across the universe mingling in harmony. Marcus, a young human diplomat, navigated through the crowd with an ease born of frequent travel and a genuine curiosity about alien cultures. It was on one such evening that he noticed her, a lone alien girl, her silhouette ethereal against the neon glow of the market stalls. Her species, the Eldri, were rare in this part of the galaxy. She seemed visibly distressed, clutching a small device that flickered sporadically. Marcus approached cautiously, his voice gentle. "Do you need help?" he asked, his tone conveying sincerity. Lorene looked up, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and surprise. I think I'm lost," she admitted, her voice a soft musical chime that resonated slightly with emotion. "My translator is malfunctioning," Marcus smiled reassuringly. "I'm Marcus. Let's see if we can fix that for you." He extended his hand, a universal gesture of peace. Hesitantly, Lorene handed him the device. As he examined the translator, Marcus tried to make light conversation to put her at ease. "I've read about the Eldri. You're from Epsilon Tranquillus, right? I hear it's beautiful." "Yes, very peaceful," Lorene replied, relaxing slightly as she watched Marcus tinker with the device. "Much quieter than here." With a few adjustments, Marcus managed to get the translator working. "There you go. Should be all fixed." "Thank you." "Marcus," Lorene said, her relief evident. She looked around, still a bit unsure. "Could you maybe show me how to get back to the spaceport?" "Of course, I'd be happy to," Marcus responded. As they started walking, Marcus pointed out various landmarks and vendors. Lorene's curiosity grew with each step. Her questions about human culture led Marcus to share stories of his own travels and experiences. As they walked, the initial awkwardness faded, replaced by a budding friendship. Lorene was particularly fascinated by a stall selling exotic plants from different planets. Marcus bought her a small, radiant flower that thrived in zero gravity. "To remember your visit by?" he joked. Lorene laughed, and in that moment Marcus saw her in a new light, not just as a lost alien, but as a fellow traveler in the vast expanse of space. Their walk continued, each sharing stories from their worlds, finding common ground in their love for the stars. By the time they reached the spaceport, the night had deepened, and the stars shone brightly above, mirrored by the lights of departing ships. "I can't thank you enough, Marcus," Lorene said, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "It was my pleasure, Lorene," Marcus replied. "Perhaps you'd like to explore Zalara again tomorrow? I could show you some of the sights you missed." "I would like that very much," Lorene answered, her smile bright. As Marcus watched her board her ship, he felt a sense of accomplishment, not just in helping someone in need, but in bridging the gap between two very different lives, if only for an evening. He walked back through the now familiar streets of Zalara, eager for their next meeting. Chapter 2. Language of Gestures. The following day brought a gentle buzz to Zalara as its inhabitants began their routines. Marcus arrived early at the agreed meeting spot, a small cafe with a view of the bustling market. He spotted Lorene already there, her face lighting up as she saw him. "Good morning, Marcus," Lorene greeted, her translator functioning perfectly. "I hope I'm not too early." "Not at all. I just got here myself," Marcus replied, leading the way to a table. "What would you like to try? The Cafsian brew here is fantastic." "I'll trust your recommendation," Lorene said, settling into her seat. As they ordered, Marcus noticed how much more at ease she seemed, her posture relaxed, and her voice more confident. With drinks in hand, they resumed their cultural exchange. "So, Lorene, tell me more about Eldri customs. I'm curious about your traditions," Marcus ventured, genuinely intrigued. Lorene explained, "We have a tradition called Silinra. It's a festival of lights, quite similar to your Diwali or Hanukkah, I suppose. Families gather to light up the night sky with natural luminescence. It's about celebrating the light within." "That sounds beautiful," Marcus remarked. We have something similar where I grew up. People come together to share food and stories, and the whole community lights up with fireworks. Their conversation flowed seamlessly from traditions to personal anecdotes about their planets. Marcus shared a funny incident from his childhood involving a misadventure with a homemade rocket and his dog, which made Lorene laugh. As they walked through the market, Marcus showed Lorene various human gadgets and tools. They stopped at a stall displaying high-tech devices where Marcus picked up a holographic map projector. "This shows you any location in the galaxy. Here, let me show you where I'm from on Earth." Lorene peered into the glowing map, fascinated. "And where is your family now?" "They're back on Earth." "I send them pictures and messages whenever I can," Marcus replied, his voice tinged with a hint of homesickness. Lorene touched his arm lightly, a gesture of comfort. "They must be proud of you, venturing so far to build bridges between worlds." "Thank you, Lorene." "That means a lot," Marcus said, feeling the warmth of her empathy. Their tour continued, with stops at various vendors. Lorene was particularly taken with a stall selling musical instruments from different galaxies. Marcus encouraged her to try playing a theremin-like instrument, which responded to hand movements without needing to be touched. "You're a natural," Marcus chuckled as Lorene skillfully coaxed a melody from the instrument, her movements graceful and assured. "It reacts to energy and motion much like the wind harps back home," Lorene explained, her face alight with excitement. "You try." With some coaching, Marcus attempted to play the instrument, resulting in a series of comedic sounds that had them both laughing. "I think I'll stick to my day job," he joked. As the day drew to a close, they found themselves at a quiet overlook, watching spacecrafts dart across the evening sky. "Today was wonderful," Lorene said. "Thank you for showing me your world." "It was my pleasure. I learned just as much from you," Marcus replied. "Shall we do this again tomorrow? Maybe you can show me more about the Eldry ways." "I'd like that," Lorene agreed, her smile reflecting a shared joy of newfound friendship and understanding. Chapter 3. Echoes of the Past. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the cafe to find Lorene already there, surrounded by digital pads filled with images of her homeworld, Epsilon Tranquillus. As he approached, she looked up with a smile. "Marcus, I thought today we could share more about our histories," Lorene suggested, gesturing to the pads. "That sounds like a great idea," Marcus replied, settling into a seat beside her. "What do you have there?" "These are images of Tranquillus, its oceans, islands, and some of our oldest cities," Lorene explained, swiping through photos of shimmering waters and sprawling, verdant landscapes. Marcus was captivated. "It looks peaceful. Earth has its beauty spots, but your world seems like it's straight out of a fantasy book." "It is peaceful most of the time," Lorene agreed, then flipped to a historical section. "But we've had our challenges. Long ago, there were rival factions that almost destroyed our main island. It took a lot of effort and diplomacy to unite them." Marcus nodded, understanding. "We've had similar issues back home, different countries and cultures clashing, but also finding ways to come together." He pulled up an image on his device, showing Earth from space. "See this? Every light represents a city, each one with its own stories." Lorene leaned closer, fascinated by the image. "How did your people manage to unite?" "Through necessity and communication, much like you," Marcus said. "And now we're reaching out to the stars, hoping to make friends, rather than foes." As they continued to exchange stories, they moved from the cafe to a nearby park, where simulations of Earth and Epsilon Tranquillus environments were projected for educational purposes. They walked through a simulation of an Earth forest, the sounds and smells vividly recreated. "This feels like my home in the spring," Marcus shared, taking a deep breath. "Pine trees, fresh earth, it's rejuvenating." Lorene listened intently, then smiled. "Let me show you the highlands of Tranquillus." With a few gestures, the scenery. changed to towering cliffs and gentle winds with the sound of distant waves crashing against the shore. As they explored the simulated landscapes, their conversation deepened to include personal dreams and aspirations. Lorien expressed a desire to improve Eldri technology to better explore the universe, while Marcus talked about his hope to help foster interstellar alliances. "It's strange," Lorien mused as they paused by a simulated waterfall. "We come from different worlds, yet our goals are so aligned." "That's the beauty of it," Marcus replied. "Maybe it's not just our planets that are similar. Maybe it's us, too." They spent the rest of the afternoon discussing potential collaborative projects that could benefit both their people, sketching out rough plans on digital pads and brainstorming ideas. As the simulation sun began to set, Marcus turned to Lorien. "I think we're on the brink of something great here, not just for us, but for all who want peace and progress." Lorien looked up at the fading light, her expression thoughtful. "Yes, I believe so too, and I think our newfound friendship will play a big part in that." As they left the park, their conversation didn't wane. It grew richer with every step, framed by the virtual stars that began to twinkle above them. They agreed to meet again the next day, each departure becoming increasingly reluctant as their partnership was quickly becoming a pivotal part of their lives. Chapter 4. Intercultural Celebration. When Marcus arrived at Zalara's central plaza for the Grand Galactic Heritage Festival, the place was already alive with vibrant sights and sounds. Multicolored lanterns hovered in the air, humming faintly as if alive. Musicians from half a dozen species performed on a central stage, blending unfamiliar melodies into something oddly harmonious. Marcus caught sight of Lorien near a cluster of glowing banners, watching a group of Zelthians perform a slow, intricate dance. The movement of their elongated limbs looked almost hypnotic. He wove through the crowd to meet her. "Marcus!" Lorien greeted him, her face lighting up. She wore an outfit in soft blues and silvers that shimmered faintly, a traditional Eldri design. "Isn't this beautiful?" "It's amazing," Marcus said, taking in the scene. "This is your first festival here, right?" "Yes, and it's even more vibrant than I imagined," Lorien replied. "I never thought I'd see so many species together in one place. Everyone seems so open." "That's the point of these festivals," Marcus said, "to celebrate all the differences and maybe find a little common ground, too." They strolled through the plaza, sampling foods from dozens of worlds. Lorien was particularly fascinated by a human dessert booth. Marcus handed her a small paper tray with a serving of golden brown funnel cake dusted with powdered sugar. "Is it supposed to look like this?" she asked, studying the tangled fried dough. "It's not about how it looks, it's about how it tastes," Marcus replied. "Go on, try it." Lorien took a cautious bite and her eyes widened. "This is unexpected. Sweet, crunchy, but soft on the inside. I like it. See?" "That's the kind of surprise I was hoping for," Marcus said with a grin. They continued their exploration, stopping at stalls filled with holographic art and strange instruments. At one booth, a Hiltrax artisan demonstrated how to weave light strands into a glowing tapestry. Marcus and Lorien watched in awe as the shifting colors formed intricate patterns, seeming to tell a story all their own. "It's like painting with light," Lorien said. "I wish we had something like this back home." "Why not bring the idea back?" Marcus suggested. "Eldri artists could put their own spin on it." "Maybe we will," Lorien said thoughtfully. As the evening wore on, they found themselves at the edge of the festival, where a small clearing offered a clear view of the sky. The two of them sat on a low stone bench, surrounded by soft, colorful lights that seemed to float in the air. "Thanks for showing me around today," Lorien said. "I think I'm beginning to understand why humans are so eager to reach out to others. You don't just see the differences, you find the beauty in them." "That's one way to put it," Marcus said. He turned to her. noticing how the festival's glow reflected in her eyes. "And it's not just humans. You've shown me so much about your world, Lorraine. It's like every time we talk I discover something new." She gave him a warm smile. "I feel the same. It's been refreshing to meet someone who listens, who's genuinely curious. It makes me feel like maybe I'm not so different after all." Marcus took a breath. "You're not in the ways that matter." For a moment, they simply sat there, the sounds of the festival drifting softly in the background. Then, almost instinctively, their hands found each other. It wasn't planned or forced. It just happened. And the connection felt as natural as breathing. Lorraine glanced down at their joined hands, then back at Marcus. "You're not afraid of this, are you? Of us? Of what might come next?" "Afraid?" Marcus shook his head. "No? Why would I be? Some things just feel right, Lorraine. This is one of them." Lorraine smiled again, her gaze steady. "I think I understand. Now, humans, you're not just explorers, you're connectors." "Well," Marcus said, his lips quirking into a small smile, "I think you've connected me to something pretty special." The rest of the festival passed in a blur of color and sound, but Marcus and Lorraine barely noticed. They had found something rare in the vastness of the galaxy, and for tonight, that was enough. Chapter 5. Undercurrents of Tension. Week after the festival, the Galactic Trade Conference began at Zalara's Central Diplomatic Hall. Marcus and Lyrian were among the many delegates attending, though Marcus's role was more observer than negotiator. Still, his presence was noted. He'd become known as the human diplomat, who had quickly befriended an Eldri. Not everyone viewed this positively. "Marcus, over here!" Lorraine called as he entered the hall. She stood near a long oval table where representatives from half a dozen species were gathering. The air was charged with anticipation, the room buzzing with low murmurs and the occasional flare of translated voices. Marcus smiled as he approached. "How's it looking?" Lorraine glanced toward the Eldri delegation at the head of the table. "There's some tension already. Certain parties are worried that Earth's growing influence could shift the balance." "Not surprising, most," Marcus said. "Some folks don't like change." As the conference began, Marcus and Lorraine moved to a side section of the hall where advisors and observers could sit. They didn't have direct roles in the negotiations, but they served as unofficial liaisons, ready to provide input or insight if asked. A tall, sharp-featured diplomat from the Lyrican Union passed by, pausing to glance at Marcus. "Ah, the human with the Eldri companion," the Lyricon said, his tone neutral, but his eyes hard. "You've certainly stirred curiosity." Marcus met the gaze evenly. "We're here to learn, just like everyone else." "Learning," the Lyrican repeated before walking away. Lorraine leaned closer. "You see what I mean? There's skepticism. Some think your people are too quick to integrate, too eager to establish connections." "I'd rather be too eager than too cautious," Marcus replied. "Fear doesn't get us anywhere." As the day progressed, Marcus noticed more subtle signs of distrust. A few representatives gave him and Lorraine sideways looks, while others whispered among themselves when they passed. It wasn't outright hostility, but it was enough to create an undercurrent of unease. During a break, Marcus and Lorraine stepped out onto a balcony overlooking Zalara's central plaza. The city stretched out before them, its buildings glowing faintly under the artificial sky. "Do you think we're pushing too hard?" Lorraine asked, her voice thoughtful. "Trying to prove something that others aren't ready to see?" Marcus shook his head. "No, I think some people just need more time. Change is hard, and it makes people uncomfortable. But I also think we're showing that humans and Eldri can work together. That's not something to shy away from." Lorraine nodded slowly. "Still, it's difficult not to feel the weight of those stares. Then we show them what we can do." "Together," Marcus said firmly. "We keep being ourselves, we keep doing the work, and eventually they'll see it's not about making anyone else smaller. It's about finding strength in diversity. Lorraine's smile returned, faint but genuine. You always know how to frame things positively. It's a gift, Marcus teased. Now come on, let's head back in. The next session's about trade routes, and I've been dying to hear how the Eldri handle interstellar cargo efficiency. Lorraine rolled her eyes, but she followed him back inside. They resumed their seats as the discussions turned to logistics and policy details. Though the tension in the room didn't disappear, Marcus and Lorraine continued to work together, quietly sharing insights and providing perspectives that slowly began to earn the respect of some skeptics. By the end of the day, it wasn't a full victory, but it was a start. The lingering distrust would take time to fade, but Marcus and Lorraine knew they were making a difference, however small. Their partnership stood as a subtle challenge to the skeptics, proof that cooperation wasn't just possible, it was happening. Chapter 6. The Calm Within the Storm. The Zalara Trade Conference entered its final stretch, and with it came heightened tensions. Political stakes were higher now, and Marcus found himself pulled into several impromptu meetings. He and Lorraine had become an informal bridge between groups, a pairing that some saw as a useful model, and others viewed with suspicion. Late one evening, Marcus stepped out of a heated discussion about transit tariffs, his head pounding. Lorraine was waiting for him near the balcony, her expression concerned. "Another rough session?" she asked. "Pretty much," Marcus replied, rubbing his temples. "They're circling the same arguments over and over. No one wants to budge." Lorraine studied him for a moment before speaking. "Marcus, you're wearing yourself out. You don't have to solve all these issues alone." He chuckled wearily. "I'm not alone. I've got you, haven't I?" Lorraine's lips curved into a small smile. "Always. But still, you need a break. Come on, let's take a walk. There's a quiet garden on the other side of the hall." They wandered into the garden, where the sound of water from a small fountain provided a peaceful backdrop. Dim lights highlighted the lush alien plants, their leaves shifting color softly in response to movement. Marcus exhaled, already feeling some of the tension leave his shoulders. "This place is amazing," he said. "Why didn't we come here sooner?" Lorraine smiled as she plucked a leaf from a low-hanging branch, watching it shift from green to blue in her palm. "Sometimes we get so focused on the work, we forget to pause." They sat on a bench near the fountain, the gentle trickle of water, making the silence comfortable rather than awkward. Marcus glanced at Lorraine, noticing the way her eyes reflected the light, shifting hues like the plants around them. "You know," he began, "this conference might be driving me crazy, but I'm glad it brought us together." Lorraine's expression softened. "Me too. If someone had told me I'd be working so closely with a human, I don't think I would have believed them." "Why's that?" She hesitated, then answered honestly. "I guess I always thought humans were too brash too. Unpredictable. But you've been different. You've shown me that calm strength can be just as effective as bold action." Marcus smiled faintly. "And you've shown me that patience and subtlety can win people over in ways I never expected. I've learned more from you than from any diplomatic training." Lorraine tilted her head slightly, considering his words. "Do you really mean that?" "Every word," Marcus said, his tone earnest. "You've been the one constant in all this chaos. I'd have lost my mind by now if it weren't for you." Her hand moved slightly, as if she wanted to reach for his, but hesitated. Instead, she looked at him directly. "We make a good team, don't we?" "We do," Marcus agreed. After a moment, he added with a small grin, "But if you're going to keep dragging me into gardens and making me relax, I might start slacking off." Lorraine laughed softly. "I think you'll survive." They stayed in the garden a while longer, talking about everything but the conference. It was a rare moment of peace, a reminder that amidst the political turmoil, their connection, simple, unspoken, yet undeniably real, was something worth holding on to. Chapter 7. Unity Through Diversity. The conference concluded with a reception. In Zalara's grand hall, a towering, crystalline structure that glimmered under the simulated twilight of the station's artificial sky. Delegates from all corners of the galaxy mingled over exotic drinks and delicacies, their conversations blending into a low, continuous hum. Marcus and Lorene stood near one of the towering windows, looking out at the station's docking ring. Beyond it, ships of every size and shape floated in the void, a silent reminder of just how vast and varied the galaxy was. "Did you notice?" Lorene asked softly, nodding toward the crowd. "No one's staring at us anymore." Marcus glanced. Around, she was right. Where once they had felt the weight of skepticism, now they were just two more participants in a sea of representatives. "Guess we're not so strange after all," Lorene smiled. "It's not that we've changed. It's just people are starting to see us differently." They were interrupted by a middle-aged human man in a navy blue diplomatic uniform. "Marcus?" he said with a nod. "And this must be Lorene. I'm James Carter, one of the senior trade envoys." Marcus extended his hand. "Good to meet you, sir. I've heard about your work on the Mars-Jovian trade agreements." Carter smiled and shook. His hand then turned to Lorene. "I've also heard quite a bit about you, Ms. Lorene. The way you and Marcus managed to find common ground during this conference, frankly, it's been inspiring." Lorene raised an eyebrow. "Inspiring? That's a strong word." "Well, it's not every day you see two people from such different backgrounds working so seamlessly," Carter said. "It's a good reminder that these kinds of partnerships aren't just possible, they're necessary." After a brief exchange of pleasantries, Carter moved on to another group, leaving Marcus and Lorene alone again. Marcus tilted his head toward her. "See? People are noticing what we're doing, and it's making an impact." Lorene studied him for a moment. "Does it ever bother you that we're under so much scrutiny?" "Not really," Marcus said. "I mean, yeah, it was uncomfortable at first, but now I think it's just proof that what we're doing matters." Lorene nodded slowly. "I suppose I never expected to be in this position, to feel like I could help bring about real change." "You already have," Marcus said. "This whole conference has gone better because of you." She turned to him, her expression serious. "And because of you, I couldn't have done this without you." He chuckled. "Guess we make a pretty good team, huh?" She smiled at that, a quiet, knowing smile that carried more meaning than words could convey. "Yes, we do." Their conversation was interrupted again, this time by a Zilkorian diplomat wearing a flowing crimson robe. "Marcus, Lorene," the Zilkorian boomed, raising a glass. "You two are the talk of the conference. Well done, well done." They exchanged polite nods, and after a brief exchange, the Zilkorian moved on. Lorene exhaled softly. "I think I've met more people in the past week than I have in the last year." "Welcome to my world," Marcus said. "Constant introductions, endless handshakes, and a never-ending parade of friendly advice." "But you handle it so well," she said. "You always seem steady." Marcus gave her a faint grin. "You haven't seen me when I've run out of coffee." Lorene laughed, and for a moment the weight of the conference lifted. They spent the rest of the evening talking with other delegates, sharing stories of Earth and Epsilon Tranquillus, and enjoying the rare camaraderie that comes from a successful diplomatic gathering. When the reception wound down and the crowd began to thin, Marcus and Lorene found themselves back at the large window. The lights of the station flickered softly, and the silence of the void beyond felt more comforting than empty. "Marcus," Lorene said after a long pause, "what happens after this, after the conference?" "Well, I go back to Earth. You go back to Tranquillus, and we keep doing what we do," he said. "But just because we're apart doesn't mean we stop working together." She looked at him, her eyes steady. "Do you really believe that?" He nodded. "Absolutely. We've proven that distance doesn't matter. Understanding does." Lorene smiled. "You always find a way to make things sound so simple." "It's a gift," he said with a shrug. "And besides, we've come too far to let something as small as a few light years get in the way." Their conversation trailed off as they stood there side by side, watching the stars and the ships that carried them. It wasn't the end of their journey, just another step along the way. And they both knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Chapter 8. The Future Unwritten. The aftermath of the conference left the spaceport unusually quiet. Delegates who had once thronged its halls were now aboard their ships, headed home. Lorene and Marcus stood near one of the wide observation windows, watching a cargo freighter slowly depart. Lorene glanced at Marcus. "So, it's back to Earth." "For you," he nodded. "Yeah, back to the usual grind. What about you?" "Back to Tranquillus," she said softly. "But I'm not sure what it'll feel like now." "How so?" She turned to face him. "Before all of this, I thought I understood. The universe, my place in it. But now, everything feels bigger, more complicated." Marcus nodded in understanding. "I know what you mean. Sometimes it's easier to keep your world small. But then you meet someone, or something, that changes the way you see everything." Lorene smiled faintly. "You're good with words." He grinned. "It's a requirement in my line of work." They stood there for a moment, a comfortable silence settling between them. The stars outside the window felt closer somehow, less like distant points of light, and more like familiar neighbors. "So, what's next for you?" Lorene asked. "What do you want to do?" Marcus shrugged. "Keep building connections. Keep finding ways for our people to work together. There's so much we can share, so much we can learn." She tilted her head. "You really believe in this, don't you?" "Yeah," Marcus said simply, "because I've seen it work. I've seen how we can come together when we let go of fear and just talk. Listen." Lorene's gaze softened. "You make it sound so easy." "It's not," Marcus admitted. "But that doesn't mean it's not worth trying." Lorene hesitated, then reached out to place a hand on his arm. "You've taught me a lot, Marcus, not just about humans, but about what's possible." He covered her hand with his expression earnest. "You've done the same for me, Lorene, and I don't want this to end." "Neither do I," she said quietly. "But we'll be in different star systems, different worlds." "Doesn't mean we can't still talk," Marcus said. "Stay in touch, plan visits. We've already crossed galaxies to find common ground. What's a few light years?" Lorene chuckled. "You make it sound simple again." "Because it is," Marcus said. "We've already done the hard part. The rest is just figuring out how to keep going." She looked at him, her smile warm and real. "Then I guess we keep going." "Yeah," Marcus said, his voice steady. "We do." As the cargo freighter vanished into the stars, Marcus and Lorene stood together, watching the universe stretch out before them. It was vast and unknown, but not nearly as intimidating as it once seemed. They knew the path ahead wouldn't always be easy, but they also knew they didn't have to face it alone.